We're diving into the wonderful world of MIDI yet again. Today we have not one, but two new controllers from Judas, the Kedem 6 with, you guessed it, 6-foot switches, and the Kedem 4 with 4-foot switches. What is interesting about both of these is not only do you have these 6-foot switches on the Kedem 6 and 4-foot switches on the Kedem 4, you've got a touchscreen right in the middle there that lets you program all sorts of different MIDI commands right on the unit itself. And then there is a pretty comprehensive set of MIDI ports on this. The Kedem 6 has 2 DIN jacks. It's got 4 MIDI TRS jacks on here. You can add an expression pedal and external foot switches on here. In fact, 2 sets of external foot switches, and it's got MIDI in on the Kedem 4. This is slightly more streamlined, where you've got 3 MIDI TRS capable jacks. One of them on this can be set up as a switching relay. 2 on the Kedem 6 can be set up as a switching relay. You've got a single expression port, a MIDI in port on here, and then just a single MIDI out via DIN. There's USB MIDI on here as well. And these foot switches, even though there's only 4 of them on here and 6 of them on here, can actually accept multiple different commands. So you can fire one set of MIDI messages by tapping. You can fire another set by double tapping. You can fire another set by pressing and holding, and then there's this really cool double long hold on here, which lets you send another one. Furthermore, you can trigger messages either on the foot switch being pressed in or on the foot switch being released, and you can send so many MIDI messages per foot switch operation on there. Let's dive in. This is going to be a long one. This might be a little bit technical, but I will do my best to explain it clearly and also make a bunch of greasy guitar noises. A big thank you to Judas for sending both of these units out so that I could make this video. I'll put a link to their website in the video description. But for now, let's go. Looking at the front panel, you can see that you have your presets organized into different banks. So you can have totally different foot switch setups on different banks. This particular setup here, I'd be using with something like my Fractal FM3. This setup here on bank 2, I'd be using with a pedal board featuring, say, a preamp and a few Strymon pedals. Number 3, I've got set up with my Fractal VP4 to engage a bunch of different effect channels, scenes, the tuner, and different presets over here. You can get access to a bunch of global settings over here, like your favorite setups. You can control all the different MIDI settings over here. You can control what the TRS MIDI jacks do on here. So they can either be type A, type B, they can be tip active, ring active, or you can even set them up so that they are switching relays instead. So the first 2 on this one are pure TRS MIDI. The other 2 on there could be TRS MIDI or switching relays. Very handy if you had pedals that, say, support relay jacks but not MIDI, or for changing channels on your amp. If it's not MIDI capable, you can connect an external dual switch on here. You can have an expression pedal hooked up. This is an absolute hub for MIDI fun. There's the Air MIDI setting, which we'll look at later, and then you have your user settings in here so that you can customize this. I also like that there's a bunch of favorites that you can program in here for different setups. They also have a library of presets so that if you've got a particular device, like say a Strymon pedal, you can just look up the Strymon specific library there and it will have all the different MIDI CCs pre-programmed in there. It can also connect to Wi-Fi to do all your firmware updates immediately rather than having to connect it to a computer. Again, they've kind of thought of everything on here. So let's have a look at how we would operate it. Each of the 6-foot switches, or the 4 switches on the Kedem 4, are going to give you multiple different foot switch commands. For example, I can press. There is a long press feature over here. There is a double press feature. And there's also this command here where I double press and then give it a long hold. They're calling long double. If I want to program a particular foot switch, like this D foot switch here, I can just tap on it. Then I can go into each of those different commands and set individual MIDI commands as well as relay switching commands on there. Furthermore, there is a secondary function for every switch which will activate on the release. So you can see I've got press and press release, double release, long release, and then long double release. So really, there's 8 different commands per foot switch. If I wanted to program the press function over here, I can just press on it. Then I've got my list of available MIDI messages that I can send. And look at this, you can send quite a few per function on here. So if I go back up, this is fairly straightforward. I've set this one up for my Fractal Audio VP4. The press command over here, I can just tap on. I can have a MIDI program change, a MIDI CC. You can see at the moment I've got a MIDI CC channel 1, CC34, a value of 0. I can even have dynamic MIDI CCs if I wanted to over here. So let's say I had a parameter I wanted to continuously control. I can set the maximum and minimum CC value and the amount of time that it dynamically moves between those, say for a filter sweep or something like that. That is a very nice extra function on there. I can also set up a MIDI note or a relay command on here, and we'll take a look at how you'd use MIDI program changes, CCs, and relays with a setup in just a little bit. Once I'm happy with that, I can exit that and I can save it. And again, I'm just using a single MIDI command over here, but I'll show you a setup which uses multiples on there. And again, that is just for the press command on this one button. I could have different commands set up for the double press, for the hold over here. You can see everything is super snappy and very nice and easy to dial in. If I wanted to edit a different foot switch, say up here, where I'm going to be sending some MIDI program changes, I can have those on there as well. So each foot switch command, not just each foot switch, I'm going to stress that again, can send all these different MIDI messages in here. Pretty amazing. You could control an absolute space shuttle full of effects on here. Let's take a look at a real world setup though, using the Kedem controller along with a Friedman IRJ preamp, Strymon Big Sky and Dig, and then an old TC Electronics chorus that has a relay switch input. Here's a board that I've put together with the Friedman IRJ, Strymon Dig, and Strymon Big Sky MX, which are all MIDI capable, along with an old TC Electronic SCF. Plus, this one isn't MIDI programmable, but you can control the bypass with an external relay switch on here, which I've done. So I am coming out of the Kedem 4 via a traditional 5-pin MIDI cable into the Big Sky MX. The MIDI through of the MX is going to the MIDI in of the IRJ. The Dig, however, doesn't use 5-pin MIDI. It uses TRS MIDI. So I'm using a TRS cable from one of the TRS MIDI jacks on the Kedem 4 straight into the Dig. Then I'm using one of the combo jacks on the Kedem 4 as a relay switch to control the bypass on the SCF. Now, each of these devices is set on their own unique MIDI channel, and with each foot switch command, I have programmed individual MIDI commands which can either change programs via MIDI PC or control different functions using MIDI CC. So the core tones on here are either going to be channel 1 and 2 on the IRJ, an optional boost, then various presets on the Dig and the Big Sky MX. I also want to be able to control the bypass of the Dig and the bypass of the SCF. So if I hit button number 1, this switches me over to channel 2 of the IRJ, a plate reverb preset on the MX. It turns the Dig and the SCF off, and I've got a straight up rock rhythm tone. Happy days. Now let's say that I wanted to kick on the Dig just to this rhythm tone. What I've set up is if I press and hold this foot switch, it will send a MIDI CC to activate the Dig. Now I've got a delay on top of that. Happy days. You can see that when I kick that switch again, it turns the Dig back off, but everything else remains the same. On this foot switch over here, I've set it up for a lead sound. So we're going to have the boost on channel 2 of the IRJ kicked in, and we're going to go over to a different delay on the Dig. I'll show you how I've programmed each of these switches in just a second, but let's hear 2 more sounds out of this. This top button up here, I'm using as a kind of pushed clean. So I'm switching over to a room reverb on the Big Sky MX, and now I've got the boost on channel 1 of the IRJ. If I press and hold this, it gives me the option to kick in the Dig, which I've set up for a very short delay with modulation. So essentially a chorus. really like having the option to turn the dig on and off across all of these presets with a hold command. Finally, let's hit this button because this is going to be an ambient preset. Switches over to this dual reverb preset on the Big Sky MX, the clean channel on the IRJ, a very long stereo delay, and the relay switch has activated the SCF for a really wide stereo chorus on there. This is pretty gorgeous. I'll just take you through all of those sounds in order now. Super powerful and flexible and really easy to program on the unit itself. For example, if I wanted to go in and tweak the settings for this foot switch here, which I've got set up as my rhythm sound, what I'm currently doing on the press command is sending 3 different MIDI program changes on different MIDI channels to each device. So the IRJ, Dig, and Big Sky MX are each on their own separate MIDI channels, and I can send different MIDI program changes to each of them. For example, the IRJ, I'm recalling preset number 1. The Dig, I'm also recalling preset number 1. And then on the Big Sky MX, I'm recalling preset number 104. Furthermore, I'm sending a MIDI CC on channel 2 to the Strymon Dig, which is going to bypass the dig itself. So while I'm recalling that preset, I'm also bypassing it. If I wanted to show you a different example, say my lead setting over here, I'm just recalling different presets. So I've got preset number 2 on the IRJ. I've got preset number 1 again on the dig, but this time it's engaged. So I've got my delay, and then I've got preset 105 on the Big Sky MX. My ambient settings are a little more interesting over here because on the press command, I'm again sending different MIDI program changes, but I'm also sending a relay command over here. You can actually hear this click when I change through the different options on there. So that relay is engaging the chorus over there. A setup like this is mostly choreographing all the different MIDI program changes, but you would remember that on my rhythm scene, if I held down the foot switch for a long press, I was engaging the dig. So I'm just sending a single MIDI CC over here, which is really cool. Again, I could send out a relay command to the TC electronic chorus on there. I can even look up in the little dictionary function here, different brands for their different MIDI CCs. So you've got a lot of different companies represented in here. There's a whole library, everything from stuff like Strymon, Friedman, Electro Harmonics, Boss, Fractal Audio. It's pretty wild that they have gone through and implemented all the different MIDI CC commands in here. So for example, if we look up Strymon over here, and I look up the device, let's say the Dig V2, I can go through and instead of having to remember the MIDI CCs, I've got all my different parameters pre-programmed in here. This, for me, is very, very handy because it means I don't have to go and look up the manual like I did when I first got this. This was something that I didn't realize you could do, but if I want to change the delay type in here, I want to change the different mixes in there. I could have mix as a parameter over here from my CC dictionary, then set it up as a dynamic CC so that I can say sweep from a value of 20 all the way through to a value of 127. So like sweeping through the different mix values on there, or I could use this as a modulation source for something that doesn't have modulation. The deeper you dive with this, the cooler it gets. Let's switch over to another setup though, which I think a lot of you are going to be interested in with one of my Fractal devices. I'm really happy with this setup I've got going with the Fractal VP4 and the Kedem 6 using the press, hold, and double press features, using button A, I've got my favorite preset set up. So I've got this LT Effects Post preset set up here on the tap function. If I press and hold, it can take me to this Hair Metal Post feature. If I double tap, I've got it set up to this Rack Gods Post preset on here. So 3 of my favorite presets available anytime I like. Then I'm controlling all 4 scenes using this single button down here. If I tap, I've got scene 1. If I double tap, I've got scene 2. If I press and hold, I've got scene 3. Then if I press, then long hold, I get scene 4. So this is probably the coolest extra function on there. I'll take you through those 4 different scenes. So instant access to my favorite presets, instant access to the 4 available scenes, and then I have set up E and F so that I can toggle on or off the individual effects in a given preset or scene. So let's go back to scene 1 over here, LT lead. What I can do is tap this foot switch here to engage the first effects block, which in this case is a pitch block. Now, if I want to disengage that, I'm going to press and hold it on there. So I can kick my pitch in and out really easily. And then similarly, if I double tap that, I can engage my second effects block. If I double long press over here, I can disengage that one. I've got similar functionality set up over here with the F button. So if I tap it, I've got my delay on. If I press and hold, I've got my delay bypass. If I double tap, I can kick in the reverb. If I double long press on there, I can take the reverb out. Okay, let's do this. Let's turn that reverb on. One final piece of functionality on here is being able to cycle through the different channels on the VP4. So there's 4 available effect blocks with 4 different channels on them. I have set up the 4 different commands on this foot switch to cycle through them. So I can have different flavors of reverb on here. Finally, I am just using this button here to toggle the tuner on and off. If I press it, it's disengaged. If I press it and hold it, it is engaged on there. It's so handy. It unlocks so much extra power and functionality from the VP4. And again, I'm just using these 6 foot switches on here. And again, all programmable from the front panel on there. You can see my press function, my double press function, my long hold function over here, and my long double. I also like that when I hit these, it will fire the MIDI command on there so that I can test it out easily. There's also a bunch of other foot switching functions like tap tempo and bank up and down. For example, this foot switch here I've programmed on the press function. Instead of having a MIDI control or a favorite, I've got it set up as a device, and I've set the device as tap tempo. You've also got bank up and down, bank jumps, tempo up, double tempo, half tempo, a bunch of really handy little features in there. So I'm going to leave that as tap tempo on there. And then if we come back out, I've got this foot switch here set up as a global bank up on the press command over there. So you can see I've got it set as bank up, and I can set that as a global switch. So we're all good there. I've had the double tap function set up as bank down, and I'll show you how I'm using this with my Axe FX 3. I've got these 4 buttons at the moment as my scenes. So scene 1, 2, 3, and 4. When I double tap, I'm going to get scene 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'll take you through that really quickly. So just a couple of examples of the scenes I've got going on there. Then the next bank, when I bank up over here, I've got individual effect controls over here. So if I want to turn the drive on and off, I can do that with a tap or with a double tap to disable it. If I wanted to disable the ring modulator over there, I could do that as well. If I wanted to engage the delay, I could just tap it on. Now I've got a filtered delay. I can use this control as a tap tempo control to set the tempo over here and then transmit it via MIDI clock to my Axe-FX 3. Furthermore, I can set up an expression pedal. So I've got my Fractal EV1 plugged in over here, and you can see it is even going to give me a readout of the range of the pedal on the bottom there. If I go into my MIDI setup over here and go to TRS, I can even set up the type of expression pedal that I'm using, and then I can zero it out over here. So I can basically calibrate it using this, which is very, very handy. I've got this set up just to control the wah in my main scenes over here. So let's come out of this and I'll let you hear the wah maybe on the lead scene over here. What I like about this is I could use the bank up and bank down function essentially as a page turner to change the layouts on here, and then anything that can be controlled by a MIDI CC in the Axe-FX 3, which is just about any parameter you like, I can set up in here. The Axe-FX 3 can take up to 16 external controllers. So I could set up, say, MIDI CC sweeps using the dynamic CC function in here and automate a bunch of parameters all from this Kedem 6 MIDI controller. Furthermore, I've got scenes, I've got tap tempo, I've got bank up and down. I can access the tuner on there. I think I've got across the point on here that yes, on the surface you have 6 foot switches, but it's worth remembering there's up to 8 individual foot switch commands, and then every single one of those has about 30 different MIDI messages that you can send on there. Then you've got dozens and dozens of individual banks that you can customize. So the control is, I think, about as close to functionally limitless as you would need on a small MIDI controller. On top of all of this, there is their Air MIDI feature in here, which lets you wirelessly connect multiple Kedem controllers. So you could say have 2 of these Kedem 6 controllers, or a Kedem 6 and a Kedem 4, or 2 Kedem 4s to create even more integrated foot switch layouts on here. So I'm going to show you how to do that with a Kedem 6 and a Kedem 4. Essentially, I'm going to mount the 4 on my pedal board, and I will use this to send wireless MIDI messages to that. So there are going to be MIDI cables connected from the Kedem 4 to the hardware units, but then this is just going to be operating on its own wirelessly to the other controller, which I think is very, very cool. As you can see here, the Kedem 6 is only powered on. There's no other cables going from it, but it is connected with Air MIDI to the Kedem 4. I'll test it with the clock. So I'm just hitting in the same tap tempo, which you can see is synced across both devices. Now I can wirelessly send program changes, CCs, any commands I want to the pedal board from the Kedem 6. So again, the Kedem 6 is wirelessly connected to the Kedem 4, which is plugged into the rest of the board. You can also enable two-way communication between 2 controllers on here. So for example, if you wanted to have something like a Morningstar MC8 with 8 buttons, you could take 2 Kedem 4 controllers and combine them with Air MIDI so that you've now got an 8-button control. I really like with the Air MIDI functionality that if you chose to start by buying the 4-button foot switch and then you find out down the track that maybe you wanted 8 buttons or 10 buttons for MIDI control, that you don't have to replace this. You can simply augment it with one of the other controllers. I like that future-proofing concept where you can use it in a modular sense, the way you might use traditional pedals. You start out by buying an overdrive and a delay, and then down the track, when you want a chorus, you get a chorus pedal, and you don't throw your overdrive and your delay out because you get the chorus, you just add it to the rig. So that modular element of Air MIDI and the fact that you can connect potentially a lot of different devices on there is really unique. I'm really looking forward to what they do in the future with other products and that concept. However, I think the two strongest points with this, firstly, the foot switching options and the number of ports on here make this, in my opinion, a really great choice if you're getting into the MIDI ecosystem, because you can start out really simple with it. If you just look at this and go, hey, 6 buttons, great, I can do 6 things with that. I can control 1 or 2 devices really easily. I don't have to worry if I then get another MIDI capable pedal that it's going to have some MIDI port that isn't supported on here, because they're all supported on here. In fact, being able to swap between TRS MIDI Type A and Type B and have relay switching if you wanted to integrate, say, amp channel switching on there is really comprehensive. It feels like a safe choice if you were going to go out and buy something that you want to use for a long time and then build a MIDI capable rig around it. The next thing is programming on the unit. It's not only easy, it's actually kind of enjoyable. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, because MIDI has always, at best, felt like a chore to me. Something that when I get to the point where I'm really happy with my sounds, I set up a big pedal board or a rack, then I've got to go through and program it, and you kind of spend more time trying to get the controller to talk to your gear and menu surfing, especially having used a bunch of older MIDI stuff on there. This is just so much easier. The touchscreen is really nice and responsive, and I like that you can customize it to however you want it to look on there. Those two things together really are the strong point. Now, what I'm looking forward to seeing is how they support this from a software perspective, and once they start getting a bunch of user feedback. Because for me personally, what I would really like to be able to do, say when I press this foot switch here and it tells me, hey, you've pressed foot switch E, I'd actually like, if I give this a custom name, for it to tell me the custom name and also tell me that I've pressed that foot switch. I like that with, say, the double tap, it gives you a different color and it tells you, hey, you've done a double tap. How cool is that? But once you spend a bit of time with this and programmed it, I know I'm going for a double tap on there, and I will know that it's been successful when I see the correct, say, scene on my Fractal come up, or when I see the patches switch on my pedal. So being able to add some extra customization to that, being able to expand the preset libraries in there by users and have some kind of collaborative community with all of that, I think would be a really great feature that they could add on, and not necessarily like a hardware thing or a software thing on there. That's more building out a community with these, which I think is going to be great, because not everyone has every single pedal and not everyone wants to go and read every single manual out there, or at least, have to scrape the web with a large language model and try to decipher different manufacturers' MIDI programming specifics. I like that, for example, if I program some Fractal stuff, I'd like to be able to upload that and share it with people, or even just back it up for myself. So I am looking forward to seeing what they do in that regard. I'd also just like to see it in the hands of a bunch of users so that they can get some user feedback. Incorporate that user feedback, which is going to be so important on there. So hopefully by doing this, I've demonstrated, one, yeah, this is a really solid product. And I think if you went and bought one of these, one, it's going to work. Two, it's not going to drive you totally crazy. And three, it should be relatively future-proof in your rig. If you'd like to learn more, I will drop a link to their website in the video description. Again, a big thank you to the people at Judas for sending these out to me so that I could play around with them and make this video. If you want to support what I do directly, links to my Patreon and the music that I make in the video description. Until next time, go and make some glorious guitar noises, and I'll see you on the next one.